Utah and Oklahoma State face off in a clash of some of the best the Big 12 has to offer.
Oklahoma hosting their first ever SEC versus SEC game.
All the faith in the world in Alex Orji's throwing ability.
Wolfpack, Tigers, Textile Bowl.
Let's get some insight on the Wildcats.
We are just a day away from Nebraska and Illinois.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
Utah and Oklahoma State face off in a clash of some of the best the Big 12 has to offer.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes.
This game has been so hyped all offseason. I think it's the best matchup on the Big 12 schedule. And it's crazy still that that's how we open Big 12 play, but it's going to be such a fun Saturday night in Stillwater.
Oh, I could not agree more. There's a lot of reasonings why this game is naturally going to be big time. You have the old school hateful 8 flag barriers of the Big 12 and the new big dog of Utah coming into the Big 12. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. The storylines kind of write themselves. And realistically, without OU, without Texas, there's not a lot of rivalries. The Holy War is going to be absolutely massive for the Big 12. Farmageddon, of course, is always going to be big. Iowa State, K-State. But we don't have a rival. It should be Texas Tech, but it seems like this Utah rivalry is just naturally coming along fairly quickly, and I like you cannot wait for the kickoff.
It's going to be so much fun. And I totally agree. I think it's just the consistency from both programs. If you look over the past few years, Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy, how they have built these powerhouses into shape that makes these two such natural rivals. So we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about the Utah offense, Oklahoma State defense first. Then we'll talk about Oklahoma State offense, Utah defense. And when you start with the Utah offense, you have to start with Cam Rising. Now, look, Brett McMurphy reported earlier in the week that he expected Cam Rising to play. Dorian Singer, Utah's receiver, said Cam Rising is going to play. The line has been doing all kind of weird things. But I even had someone on my show last week, Porter Larson of ESPN 700, who broke the news about Cam Rising's x-ray. He said that if last week was a big game, Cam would have played. I am still fully expecting Cam Rising to play in this game. We'll see how everything comes to pass. But there is still that question because we haven't even seen Cam Rising play 4 full quarters of football. What is he going to look like? Well, when he has been in, Utah's had success, but it's been against Southern Utah and Baylor. Now, they've scored on 8 of their 11 drives when Cam Rising has led the team, but this Oklahoma State team, now, is their defense going to end up being better than Baylor? That remains to be seen just with some of the issues they've had, but how's Cam Rising going to perform in this kind of a hostile environment when the other 2 games were at home? There's a lot that we don't know about how Cam is going to look, which feels weird because he's played a few games, but it's been against lesser opponents, obviously.
But I think you hit the nail on the head. Cam Rising is going to be a massive factor in this game. But, I've told you a little bit off air, Oklahoma State has a propensity to get dominated by running quarterbacks. And I know Cam Rising can run, but I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that we weren't a little apprehensive about going up against Isaac Wilson. I'm not saying that Cowboy Country is up in arms about facing Cam Rising, but when it comes to preparation, for some reason, Russian quarterbacks give us a hard time. So I really hope this is not a smoke and mirrors situation. And honestly, I want to see Utah at their best. I want to see Utah full of every starter that they have available, because not only does it help from a perception standpoint, but it also helps you notice if you're ready or not yet, right? We think we got a test with Arkansas, but we don't really know how good Arkansas is actually going to be. When I see film and team speed, sideline to sideline, Utah does have some of that Arkansas capability that is a cause for concern. But my biggest concern isn't Cam Rising, nor is it Isaac Wilson. It's that stupid tight end, Keithy.
He's so impressive, and I know that. Look, he has not had a game over 100 yards yet, but you look at the 3 touchdowns against Southern Utah, and he is just such a mismatch nightmare. There's been questions like, hey, how's he going to project in the NFL? He's kind of a tweener. Well, I just know the guy knows how to get open, catch passes, and make plays. Right. And unfortunately for Oklahoma State, we've seen them give up chunks of passes, chunks of plays in general so far. When you look at this Oklahoma State's team's defensive rankings, I do feel good. I'm just going to come out and say it. Overall in this game, I like a lot of the matchups for Utah based on what we've seen. When you're looking at this Oklahoma State defense, I've not been impressed by their defensive line overall. I feel like they've gotten blown off the ball in both the Arkansas and the South Dakota State game. Then you're looking at the secondary. There have been wide open receivers frequently. You rank 124th in yards allowed per game, 128th against the pass, 122nd in first downs allowed, even 92nd in rush yards allowed per game. So how much confidence do you have in this Oklahoma State defense that is going to be facing a Utah offense that, like I mentioned with Cam Rising, yes, concerns because he's still coming back, but when he's been under center, this offense has done what they're supposed to do and produce touchdown drives?
I would be absolutely hammered drunk if I were to sit here and pretend that our defense is amazing and it gives us the warm and fuzzies that help us sleep well at night. That's not the case. We're very well aware that our defense has not been performing up to expectations. Whenever you have essentially 9 returning starters out of 11 dudes, that continuity alone should equal enough communication to not have wide open holes, but it is happening. Now, I will say, we've been experimenting with a different iteration of the 3-3-5. Originally, it was going to be Colin Oliver playing a stand-up defensive end role that could also, flash and play a boundary or get out to the numbers. But he's not playing, right? So I think we're going to have to schematically change some things with Kendall Daniels. He went from a safety to a linebacker to, I think he might fulfill that Colin Oliver style role. So we don't even know exactly what our defense is yet. And this is not exactly the best time to just be figuring it out.
Yeah, that's where it does get tough. You do have special players still, though. I really like Nick Martin. I mean, he's a guy you just can't. Every time you turn on the tape, you're like, okay, so that's going to be interesting. The Utah offensive line has been up and down. I think Arkansas's running game might be better than Utah's. I think that's going to be a narrow thing. I'm curious how that progresses along the season. So is Utah going to be able to consistently generate push? Now, I do think whether it's Keithy, Dorian Singer, I do think some of these Utah players are going to be able to win against Oklahoma State defensive backs. So then that's where it pops up for Cam. Is he going to miss throws because he's rusty? Is he going to be dialed in and on the money? When Utah's lost games with Cam Rising, there have been some big road games where he hasn't been able to perform. Now, a lot of times that has also come against, I would say, like an NFL caliber quarterback, and as good as Alan Bowman's played, we've talked about that in a moment. I don't view him as one of those, the Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and all of those guys of that caliber. So I'm curious to see how that factors in on the other side of the ball, and we'll touch on it in a moment. But I do expect this Utah offense to be able to move the ball. It's going to be interesting to see just if it is for sure Cam Rising, or if it ends up being they have to put Isaac Wilson out there. How does Utah's offense all come together? They got off to a slow start against Utah State, then it clicked, and they were able to kind of get rolling from there. But it's going to be fun to see how they perform. And I think, Cody, one thing that Oklahoma State fans have got to be excited is to hopefully try and get Ollie Gordon finally going, because he has not hit the ground running like, of course, Cowboys fans will have hoped. Now, I'm also going to say this is probably the best. It is the best front seven you will have faced so far. So how is that matchup going to factor into things?
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 2nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a base YouTube TV plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. For that $5 bet, you can take a look at some early Week 3 lines in the NFL. Thursday night has Aaron Rodgers against the New England Patriots. Too bad it's not Rodgers against Brady, right? Gerard Mayo has New England looking better than expected, but FanDuel not buying it. The Jets and Aaron Rodgers favored by 6.5. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oklahoma hosting their first ever SEC versus SEC game.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Massive, massive game for the Vols. Playtime is over. Whether it was a hard enough test with NC State or not, this is a big-time opponent. You start SEC play, and you start it on the road. Tough game, tough opponent, but excited it's finally here because it feels like we spent all offseason talking about this matchup.
Yeah, it's thrilled that it's here. It feels like this game week is kind of just, man, it's been a snail's pace, right? I mean, it's just Thursday morning, and you still got a couple more sleeps until they play this game. But this game has been highly anticipated. The SEC do exactly what it was doing when it was picking these games in the new format, 16-team league, welcoming in Texas and Oklahoma. Knew that Tennessee needed to go to Oklahoma with the storylines of Josh Heupel and, of course, the 2 5-star quarterbacks and, first SEC game and all that for Oklahoma. So, and two teams that entering the season have college football playoff aspirations still do. One team looks like it so far, one team doesn't, but still everything in front of both teams. So, big-time matchup, big road matchup for Tennessee. You're right, playtime is over for the Vols. Thought they would get more of a challenge against NC State. A lot of people were high on the Wolfpack entering the year. So far, that is not a good football team, but Oklahoma will certainly be the best football team Tennessee has seen.
Well, let's start there because I thought it would be a good kind of idea to take a little snapshot of both teams and where they are so far this year, 3 weeks in. Let's start with the Vols. I mean, they have exceeded, I think, everybody's expectations so far. Even people who thought Tennessee was going to be good, I think, have been taking a step back and been like, all right, the Vols are legit. And, of course, the question is, are they elite? And we're going to find that out over the next couple of weeks as these games play out. But, man, I mean, beating the snot out – I mean, you expect them to beat the snot out of Chattanooga, but 69-3 was pretty damn impressive. You expected them to probably beat NC State, but to win 51-10, super impressive. And then to stomp all over Kent State the way they did, 71-0, I mean, just doesn't get any better. Give me a – I mean, if we're giving a report card grade, giving them an A probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, right? I mean, there's one thing to say, okay, well, the level of competition's not been what you're going to see, into September on into your SEC schedule. I recognize that. But what do you do in those games? These players and these coaches didn't make these games, right? I mean, that was the administration from years and years ago. You can only do what's in front of you. You can only play the teams in front of you. I know that's coach speak, but Tennessee's gone out there and absolutely dominated every phase of the game. UTC was a second-round playoff team in FCS a season ago, top 10 team in FCS. I'm just trying to say that's a pretty good team for its level, and you go out there and dominate it the way they did. And look what they did against Georgia State, I guess the week after they left Knoxville. NC State, as I mentioned, everybody thought NC State's going to be a really good team to kind of challenge for a spot in the playoffs. So far, that's not been the case. Tennessee absolutely shut down KC Concepcion, made Grayson McCall look so pedestrian. There was no run game in that contest for the Wolfpack. Tennessee rolled in that one. And, of course, Kent State, I mean, that's the worst football team I've ever seen in my life. I hope they go and win every single game. I mean, Tennessee had no business playing them. So Tennessee has dominated, not just one convincingly. Tennessee's dominated every single, game it's had so far. So I think that's certainly worth noting. A+ on the report card right now. And, it's faced a little bit of adversity, not a whole lot, but it's going to face adversity on Saturday on the road and in this environment against the Sooners.
Yeah, I thought that NC State game was good for Nico to have the two blunders that he did, right? I mean, to throw the interceptions. You kind of have to – you knew they were going to come for any new young quarterback. They're going to turn the ball over. The hope is that they do it in a spot that it doesn't cost you a game, and it's a huge costly penalty, and it wasn't. So, that's the kind of the growing pains that Nico will go through. Now, I've had some people say maybe this is the week that he goes through real growing pains, a road, hostile environment. The one in Charlotte, there were more Vol fans there than NC State fans, it felt like. So this one might be the one. How does he respond? If he throws that pick six in Norman, can he bounce back? Does he respond? So, but again, good he got at least, it's not good to throw interceptions, but I'm saying like at least he got it out of his system. But yeah, I think overall his play has been very good, but I was hyping up Dylan Sampson in the offseason, and I had some people saying, well, it might be a little bit more running back by committee, but Sampson has been, it's been lights out. He's been awesome, and it's crazy to think him and Jaquindon Jackson right there as two of the best running backs in the SEC so far.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched every single Arkansas game. I've watched one Arkansas game, and I know they played not just 4 quarters, went into overtime. Dylan Sampson's played 7 quarters this year. It's like 7 quarters this year, second in rushing in the SEC, second in all-purpose yards, but like a close second, right behind. Right behind him. But Dylan Sampson's, blowing out everybody in terms of touchdowns in the SEC with 9 so far. He's a really good player, man. I think that, right now he's Tennessee's best player. And if he goes on the road, take this week, for example, and has one of those games where he just takes things over. Everybody in Tennessee knows who Dylan Sampson is. A lot of people around the SEC know who he is. People around college football are going to start learning, okay, this running back in Tennessee, could he be considered the best running back in the country? I mean, I don't like Heisman talking week 3 or 4, and I'm not trying to put him there, but I'm saying he's going to start getting in those conversations if he keeps this pace up, especially, in games like this on the road. So he's been phenomenal, and for Tennessee to control this game and win this game, Tennessee's definitely got to run the football efficiently, which it normally has under Josh Heupel, and Dylan Sampson obviously going to be a big part of that.
On the flip side, and kind of, again, giving a report card kind of grade through the first 3 weeks, Oklahoma, they're 3-0, but it hadn't been a pretty 3-0. I mean, that Friday night game to start off college football weekend, they crushed Temple 51-3, and they didn't do much on offense, but they didn't have to do much. I mean, the defense kind of dominated the day, and it was like, okay. Now, week 2, they get Houston, and I watched most of that game. Willie Fritz coming over from Tulane, they got their brains beat in week 1 by, I think it was UNLV, and then they go up to Norman, played a pretty competitive game with Oklahoma, and Oklahoma gets out with a 16-12 victory, but even Venable said after the game, we didn't deserve to win that game. We probably shouldn't have. And then this past week, kind of messed around with Tulane, who nearly beat Kansas State a week prior. They were able to pull away late, but that thing was close into the fourth quarter. So, some people say, like, play with your food. Maybe that's what Oklahoma's been doing. They kind of knew they were going to be favored in all 3 of these games. But the scary part for Oklahoma is defense very good, but offense has not lived up to the hype yet, particularly Jackson Arnold, big 5-star quarterback that they had high hopes for.
Well, I'll say this. I think he's got a lot of potential. And you saw last week where he kind of started feeling himself a little bit, and he had some runs, got his confidence up. As you very well know, covering this league, Nick Anderson, who I believe they're going to get back this week, 10 touchdowns a season ago, hadn't played a snap this year. Another starting receiver, Jalil Farouk, out for the year. They on the offensive line, brand new offensive line. They went and got 4 transfers. Okay, starting center's been out since week 1, high ankle sprain. Left guard's out for the year. Right tackle has been in and out of the lineup. They've had so many different combinations up front. It feels like, at least from the outside looking in, I don't pretend to know, I'm not on that beat, but it feels like they haven't even really kind of got started offensively because of all this stuff. But you got to go out and play the games, and Oklahoma has had no run game. There's no identity there in the backfield, and I think that's hurt Jackson Arnold. Defensively, I think they've looked pretty sharp, and I mean, they're going to get tested, obviously, their biggest test this week with Tennessee, so they haven't seen anything remotely close to what Tennessee's going to show them, and so we'll see how good that defense is. But pretty good against the run. Aggressive back end like last year when they had 20 interceptions already, 10 takeaways for that defense. So, I would say defense is typical for Brent Venables so far in the early season. I'd say offense, very much a letdown. But I do think that there's some contributors in there where it feels like they just keep, sinking in quicksand because of all these injuries.
Yeah, and they haven't been, like, to your point, haven't been able to get the run game going. Gavin Sawchuk ran for 744 yards and 9 touchdowns for them last year. He has been hadn't been done much for them. Javante Barnes has done a little bit, but Jackson Arnold's been their run game through the first couple weeks. So both 3-0, but again, if we're giving out grades, Tennessee gets an A so far. Oklahoma probably gets a C.
All the faith in the world in Alex Orji's throwing ability.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverine.
As I kind of look more into this, and we're going to get more deep into the advanced analytics, both PFF and SP+, in a lot of ways, this is the more kind of matchup that Michigan needs compared to Texas. Texas is just superior in almost every way. But obviously, they've had different games and stuff, and obviously by the end of the year, it could look a lot different. But what Michigan really needs, and they need it from this guy, if you're watching on video, my card of Alex Orji, they need it from him, is to look a lot like Jalen Milroe. Now, obviously, you want him to look like Jalen Milroe now and not necessarily Jalen Milroe 2022 against Texas A&M, but they still did win that game. Alabama did against Texas A&M 24-20. You'll take that, absolutely, but you would love to see it look more like one of those games where they just absolutely ran away with it. Now, keep in mind, Alabama had a lot of close games in some of these matchups, and that's what big Alabama wants you to forget about. I closed my window, so I got to reopen it here. You look at what Alabama's scores were with Jalen Milroe as a starter. Now, he didn't play in week 3 when they won 17-3 against South Florida, at South Florida, which is still funny to me. 56-7 against Middle Tennessee. They lost to Texas, which prompted the move to bench him for a minute. He comes roaring back. 24-10, 40-17. 24-10 came against Ole Miss. So you hope that defensively, Michigan's defense looks like Ole Miss's did. It is capable and possible of doing so, even if we haven't seen it this year. That's kind of the thing that you have to remember with this defense. This defense has looked nothing like what it looked like last year, and it has that capability because it's mostly the same players with a handful of exceptions, and it's not like, well, where they're really failing is but where Mikey Sainer still was or anything like that. No, that's not really the case, but they're just going to have to be smarter and play better. Obviously, they need a lot more from the linebacking core. I digress. So when you look at the individual games here, at Texas A&M 26-20, against Arkansas 24-21, hosting Tennessee 34-20, LSU 42-28. It's a mixture of the defense coming to play and the offense managing to find some stuff out. Now, obviously, Alabama had a much more talented wide receiving core than what Michigan has. If Colston Loveland does play, which is, I think, fully expected, it will be he's the best offensive player. It all depends on his limitations with his shoulder and all of that. And I can't imagine that's going to limit him completely in the passing game. It's not like a lower body injury, which I think would be much more daunting in a lot of ways. But obviously, you maybe telegraph a little bit what you're doing if Colston's out there in obvious passing downs and so on and so forth, compared to run downs and all of that. So it does matter. It's just maybe it doesn't matter as much because he might not necessarily be the target and he can take things away from you, but that would also tip your hat as to what you're trying to do. But I was taking a look at some of Jalen Milroe's stats and kind of what Alabama, how they deployed him. And that's where we're looking. How did they deploy Jalen Milroe? So in 2022, he had one game as a starter against Texas A&M. He had 83 rushing yards and 111 passing yards. So that's not necessarily like a sat on fire type scenario. You hope Michigan gets a little more passing yards out of Alex Orji, but 83 rushing yards might be about where it is. In 2023, he averaged 12 carries for 41 yards on the ground. As far as passing, he averaged 218 yards per game. Let's take a deeper look at what he did. So as far as passing is concerned, he only had one game that eclipsed 300 yards passing, and that was against Texas A&M. Otherwise, they weren't asking him to necessarily be a guy that was going to attempt a lot and do a lot. That was the game where he threw over 30 times. Every other game, it's either in the teens or the 20s, mostly the 20s. Middle Tennessee, 13 for 18, 194 yards. Texas, 14 for 27 for 255 yards, only 51% passing there. His other 50-ish percent passing, at 10 for 21 against Arkansas for 238 yards. That means he hit some long bombs. And then against Georgia in the SEC championship game that they won, 56.5%, 13 for 23 for 192 yards. The important thing is you look here, and he had 6 interceptions on the year. 2 in the loss to Texas, 1 against Ole Miss, 1 against Texas A&M, and 1 against Arkansas. Otherwise, mostly touchdowns. But generally, you're looking at an average, like I said, in the low 200s. That's kind of where Michigan needs him to be as far as passing the ball. You look at like that Tennessee 14-21, 66.7%, 220 yards, 2 touchdowns and interception. I think you can live with that in a game like this. You hope you don't have any of the turnovers, but I think you can live with that. The more important stat is what does he do on the ground rushing. He had some games where there were some negatives. It isn't that every game was like this big net positive, right? Against Texas A&M, he had negative 31s on 8 carries. He against Arkansas, which we just mentioned, 11 carries for negative 19 yards. Surprisingly, against Michigan, I don't remember this. He had 21 carries for 63 yards. he was kind of buoyed by some of these games where like 18 carries for 107 yards against Auburn. He had some where it was 8 carries for 36 yards against Mississippi State, 11 carries for 69 yards against Middle Tennessee, 7 carries for 48 yards. So with Alex Orji, the sweet spot, I think, is kind of the average of what Jalen Milroe was able to do. 12 carries for 41 yards. I think that is kind of about what you're going to need from him, especially because you want to be able to get your other running backs going as well. So if you look at Jace McClellan, their lead running back last year, I mean, he was still kind of getting his, but you want to see more. Like some of the games were 10 carries for 39 yards, and then some were 17 for 105 yards or 27 for 115 yards. Against Michigan, he was 14 for 87. So I think you need to have a little bit of that kind of balance between Orji and whether it's Mullings or if it is Donovan Edwards. Because you kind of have, I'm looking at Roydell Williams only had 1 carry for negative yards against Michigan. I don't know that, you see kind of a little bit of a mix of guys, and no one else was necessarily having that type of success. So you need to get Donovan in rhythm, but I think you can use Donovan in multiple ways, right? Because, again, looking at Alabama, as far as receiving is concerned, I think one of the important things is they got Jace McClellan involved in the receiving game, not as much as Donovan Edwards is a guy that I would really like to see them get involved. But he averaged about 10 yards a game. You want to see more than that from Donovan. But you can get him involved. And this offense has the potential to be a lot more dynamic if Michigan is smart about it and says, okay, we're gonna say that we're gonna get like 7 or 8 carries for Alex Orji. We're gonna make sure we hand the ball off another 25-ish times, maybe 30 times in the game, and then we're gonna pass another 20 times, right? So if you have 60, some like a pie of like, let's say 55, Michigan's gonna try to play complementary football, and say it's got 55 plays. I think that you want to see about 20 passing attempts, and then that means that you've got about 35 to deal with the rushing game, and then you kind of want to split that up kind of like a 15, 10, and something like that, and 10. I think that would be a good way to go. Honestly, you want to see more than 35 carries. You want to see more like 45 in a game like this. Just really keep away from the USC offense, which certainly feels daunting in some ways, but we're going to go into maybe why it's not fully as daunting. We're going to look at some of the PFF as well as the SP Plus, Bill Connolly's metrics. We'll do that here in just a moment.
5 minutes later when ours came in, that stadium was rocking like it was an earthquake.
Ahead of a huge Big Ten matchup with USC, as weird as that is to say, Michigan is making a change at quarterback.
Alex Orji, kind of surprisingly, I say this surprisingly, I'll explain why in a moment, named the starting quarterback against USC. I think that's surprising because I didn't anticipate. I was talking to some colleagues before the press conference today, and I said, "Do you think that we're going to hear anything?" And they were like, "No. Why would Sharon Moore even say it?" So that kind of tells you that they're going to put the full force behind Alex Orji, because he says, "Hey, he's going to be the starting quarterback. He's going to go forward. It's going to be all him." So I think that is interesting because obviously that means that he's going to have the full week with the ones. Everything is going to be geared behind him. Everything that he says they had everything installed as far as offensively is what the types of stuff he would run. But that means that they can hone those things this week. They can figure out what kind of passes work best for him and what kind of run plays. So this is welcome and encouraged news.
No good team over the last few seasons has pulled a defeat out of the jaws of victory quite as often as the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like the only way they lose is in games that they were sure to win in the fourth quarter. On Sunday, it was a 26.
Wolfpack, Tigers, Textile Bowl.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
ACC play begins on Saturday. The NC State Wolfpack are on the road down in Tiger Town to open up the ACC slate. I'm joined by my co-host, Kenton Gibbs, former Wolfpack defensive tackle, and John Bivens, the host of Locked On Clemson. John, thanks for joining us.
Hey, appreciate you having me. Glad to be able to come on, and nice to meet you guys, and excited to have this conversation.
John, let's get right to it. The Clemson Tigers, they're off to a 1-1 start here in 2024. They ran into the buzzsaw formerly known as Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs in week 1, but then they got their get back. They had a very impressive offensive performance against App State in week 2. So we're going to start here kind of like a big picture temperature check for all the folks down in Clemson, South Carolina. How is Clemson currently feeling here in week 4, seeing that the ACC is kind of struggling as a whole out of the gate?
Man, we are doing our best to stay grounded. I think when you look at the schedule, the scary part is how similar it looks to last year, and that's why we're trying to hold everything in that we can. Obviously, week 1 did not look good at all. Didn't see the end zone. Cade Klubnik looked like the same quarterback as last year. Play calls look like the same play calls as last year, and after a whole offseason of buzz, that's not what you want to see at all. And then you go into the App State game and look completely dominant, almost 400 yards in one half, 5 touchdowns passing, 2 rushing touchdowns, and then another Phil Maffa rushing touchdown. It looked great, right? App State game looked completely different. And so while we're feeling pretty hot, feeling pretty good, at the same time, you want to forget about the Georgia game. Like I said, it's scary because last year it looks the same way. Last year we started 0-1 to Duke in a game that we should have won. Right after that, we dominated 2 teams that we 100% should have dominated. Charleston Southern won like 66-17. FAU won 48-14. And then we got in and we started playing. Our true offense started showing. That Nets game we lost in overtime, and then we started losing. We went on a losing streak, and that's where the true offense that everyone doubted, the Cade Klubnik that everyone was like, "Who is this guy?" That really came out. So honestly, right now, as Clemson fans, we feel good. I feel good right now, but at the same time, I'm trying to be grounded because I don't want to get my hopes up with possibly a flashback to last year coming through.
Well, even with Clemson's offensive struggles, I think one thing that we can all agree upon is Clemson's defense has constantly been there. It has been it's been, for lack of a better term here, or all pun intended, it's been the rock of that team. So when you look at that, what do you think about Clemson's defense so far this season, despite what some people would look at and say, hey, this is a team that's already been blown out during this season? What would you say about the defense all in all?
What's been really encouraging to me watching is we've seen great players show up that we weren't expecting to be the foundation. Wade Woodaz, for instance, is an outstanding linebacker. No one expected him to be outperforming Barrett Carter up to this point, but yet he is by a good amount. When you look at that defense, you don't see Barrett Carter carrying us. You see Wade Woodaz making a difference, laying it down. And so that's encouraging. Our secondary, I think everybody came in expecting Khalil Barnes, maybe RJ Mickens to be carrying our secondary, but our sophomore Avian Terrell has been playing out of his mind right now. So that's what's encouraging to me is our defense is as good as it is. And our depth is so full that we're able to have players that we really thought would be hot coming out and leading this team, kind of getting a slow start, and yet other players are still coming in and filling in their gaps, thriving, playing it really well. So it's encouraging to see the depth of this defense.
You mentioned Cade Klubnik earlier, and his career at Clemson has been at times a little bit of a mixed bag. When you're looking at Cade this year in year 2 under offensive coordinator Garrett Riley, what are your realistic expectations for Cade in 2024?
So here's my thoughts. I don't know if y'all heard the interview he did a couple weeks ago, but he basically said that he was walking off the field and a coach came to him and they asked him, he was like, hey, how many games do you have to win? And Cade was like, I don't know how to answer that. I got to win all the games. What do you mean? And the coach says, you don't have to win any of them. You just have to manage it. Let other players win the games. And that's not what you want to hear from this supposedly best quarterback, top recruit. That is not a winning formula for a quarterback to carry us. And I feel like that's how he's been coached. He's been coached to be this guy, make the safe throws, make the easy plays, make the routine stuff, and then let your playmakers make the plays. Let your playmakers win the games. That App State game, I think we saw a side of Cade that we haven't saw yet. We saw him put aside that game manager and truly embrace that 5-star potential, the quarterback that we've heard all the buzz about. We saw that come through. So my expectations, my hope at least, is that Garrett Riley and Cade can embrace that a little bit more. Put aside the game manager, put aside just do your thing and let players make plays. No, let him go out there and play the dog that he is. I think we're going to truly see his real potential that we haven't got to see yet based on a little bit of a safety coaching net.
So, you talk about getting the playmakers the ball and making things happen, but you want to see more of a playmaker situation than a game manager situation, which is understandable. However, those other guys are also going to have to show up. Who are the biggest names that NC State fans who may not be super familiar with Clemson should know offensively in terms of, hey, this is a guy that when it's going from Cade's hands to his, you need to look out.
Yeah, the biggest two I'd say is obviously Phil Maffa. A lot of people have heard about him, an experienced running back. He really wasn't an RB1 last year, yet he outperformed the RB1 in Will Shipley when you look at stats. So I think him, if we can get his running game going, strong behind that offensive line, that's big. But the biggest one is Bryant Wesco. He's a true freshman wide receiver. Really didn't play against Georgia. Only had one target and caught his only reception for, I think, 5 yards. But then App State, they were like, no, you're going to start. Put him in the starting lineup. And he just absolutely tore it up. He played like a 5-star playmaker that is expected to be talented. The biggest thing with him that I think is really should worry ACC is, as big as he was in App State, as great as he played, Dabo and Garrett Riley have came out and said that he hasn't even fully grasped the offense yet. They said that every week he's understanding the offense more and more, which is going to increase his playing time, increase his snaps, increase the time that he's on the field, which is just more potentials for those big plays, explosive. So Bryant Wesco is going to be huge for Clemson if they keep utilizing him.
And John, last Clemson question for you before we switch chairs in the second half. I want to talk about Dabo and the transfer portal, and a lot gets made out of his refusal to tap into the transfer portal. What's kind of the temperature check, so to speak? Do you feel like this is potentially a make or break year for Dabo's refusal? Do you think if it goes poorly, he'll potentially adapt and begin using it? Where does that kind of fall right now?
Yeah, I think next year, we'll probably see him bring in a couple. And I think the narrative will be, oh yeah, the media got to him. Everybody said he's making an adjustment to his game. I don't think that's the case. I think he went after one or two players this year. He said that he did, and just they didn't choose Clemson. I don't think he's going to truly shift up his mindset. I think this year will be very telling. I think if he can come out and be successful, it'll be telling that, all right, Dabo knows what he's doing. He can keep coaching his game. Or maybe another year like last year and be like, all right, Dabo 100% has to change. So I think it'll be a telling year. I don't think it'll make much of a difference in Dabo's mindset.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 2nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a base YouTube TV plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. For that $5 bet, you can take a look at some early Week 3 lines in the NFL. Thursday night has Aaron Rodgers against the New England Patriots. Too bad it's not Rodgers against Brady, right? Gerard Mayo has New England looking better than expected, but FanDuel not buying it. The Jets and Aaron Rodgers favored by 6.5. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get some insight on the Wildcats.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
BYU is wearing throwback uniforms to the 1996 season when they beat Kansas State in the Cotton Bowl. Is there going to be any extra motivation from K-State? The fact that the Cougars are wearing that drop shadow Y look?
No, but really, you went there, really? And still, you think about how long ago that was. Who was the quarterback?
Steve Sarkisian.
That's incredible, man. It's absolutely incredible.
If anybody's watching this from Kansas State's perspective, that's a replica jersey of what they're going to be wearing this coming weekend. It's one of the teams that kind of defined my childhood growing up around BYU, and it's crazy to think that it's been that long in many respects, but at the same time, now that they're conference mates once again, we're back together, and it should be a fun game all the same.
It will be. I really love BYU being in this conference, and I'm glad now that Texas is gone, BYU's in, because I like them better.
Oh, hey, I think Cougar fans can appreciate that. Now, obviously Kansas State is they were one first place vote behind Utah in terms of the favorites in the Big 12 in that preseason poll. Give me a sense as they come into this game, the Big 12 opener for both teams in Provo on Saturday night. Give me a sense for where you think Kansas State is at overall currently.
Well, there was a lot of concern coming out of the Tulane game. They just didn't look very exact. They made a lot of mistakes, and they had to get those corrected. It seemed like doing that on a short week to play Arizona was a bad recipe, but it turned out great. K-State looked much better against Arizona, much more focused, very few mistakes, and I think that was more like the K-State team we expect, although I don't think this team is anywhere near its ceiling right now. I think this is a team with a great deal of promise, but in this conference, you can't look past any game. And while I wouldn't have picked this as a trap game early in the year, like before the season, coming off an Arizona game that was pretty emotional. I mean, in fact, it was one of the loudest games some people have heard in K-State history. And you got Oklahoma State next week waiting what will be another huge home game. All of a sudden, BYU's playing well. You catch them at night, and they're going to the white throwbacks. Yeah, that's not a good formula. This game is a little bit scary.
Now, this will be a 9:30 body clock game for Kansas State. And I saw some of the chatter amongst Kansas State fans on social media saying, what time are we kicking this game off? Now, I can speak from the BYU perspective. During their years of independence, they played games routinely at 8:15, 8:30 local time. So it's nothing out of the realm of weird for BYU in this respect. How do you think Kansas State's going to adapt to playing that late at night?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to adapt. I think that's what everyone's worried about. Look, I was really in favor of having Big 12 after dark, but apparently I'm one of those people. I'm in favor for other people, not the team I cover.
Okay.
We're looking at leaving the stadium around 1 a.m. if we,
if you're lucky.
Yeah, if we're lucky. So I think it's great for the conference to have that fourth window, the one that the Big 12 could never fill. Now having that, that's what really drives the added value in this conference. Now you're not just contending with everyone else in the first three time slots. Suddenly you've got that fourth one, which eliminates a lot of other conferences. So I think it's really good, but how the team will respond, that's an interesting question. We'll find out.
Give me a sense of Chris Kleiman as a coach. I remember watching him do what he did at North Dakota State. It seems like he's brought a lot of the hallmarks of what he did with the Bison with NDSU to Kansas State. Just give me a sense of your feel for him as a coach and what he's done with the Wildcats.
It's a really steady hand at the wheel. I mean, just no temper. He might have some, but he does a good job being engaged with his players as a modern day coach and lead them without going over the top, without being outlandish. He's a great guy to cover. He really is. And a lot of really good coaches that are also good people. And that's certainly what Chris Kleiman's filled his staff with. And, he's a pretty darn good football coach. He has slid in here and done a job that some said couldn't be done after Bill Snyder. He has done many of the same things, winning a Big 12 title, but has done it in his own way. And the results have looked a lot like Bill Snyder. He's still developing players that come in as walk-ons or little-known recruits are now significant players, and he's doing a lot of it with Kansas kids, which I think is pretty remarkable considering Kansas doesn't produce a ton of Division I football players, not enough for one school, and you have a bunch of other schools in here trying to recruit, and yet every offensive player you want to talk about probably is from Kansas.
That is pretty remarkable. Now, I consider guys like Bill Snyder and obviously Lavelle Edwards at BYU to be kindred spirits. What they have done for their respective programs is absolutely remarkable. I just give me a sense, how much of the legacy of the Snyder family, I should say, because it is the Snyder family stadium out there in Manhattan. Give me a sense of the legacy of Bill Snyder and how it still is around the program, et cetera.
Well, I mean, it's all because of him and the president, AD, who hired him because they took a chance and he wasn't going to take the job. But the great story is it was the dead of winter and he went up on campus and he just started talking to people who didn't know who the heck he was. And he decided after meeting people and talking to them that this is where he wanted to be. And he had some offers through the years, but you know what? The great ones stay where they are. They find their place and they stay. And what he did for the football program is minuscule in terms of what he did for the community and the university. And I don't think Kansas State's in the position to be in a power conference without Bill Snyder. The population has grown because of Bill Snyder. The university grew significantly because of Bill Snyder in the 90s and early 2000s. And this town looks nothing like the town he took over in 1989. It's just gone through an incredible evolution. So everything about Kansas State's different because that man came to town and stayed and did the job. But it was time to make a change and move on. He tried retirement once, it didn't work. And this time, was time to move on. And Chris Kleiman's done an incredible job picking up and going with it.
I think BYU fans think about what Lavelle Edwards did. There's the famous thing. He had the Detroit Lions chasing him at one point during his run in the 80s. I think they can feel the similar sentiment about what Bill Snyder means to Kansas State as compared to what Lavelle means to BYU, obviously.
5 minutes later when ours came in, that stadium was rocking like it was an earthquake.
Ahead of a huge Big Ten matchup with USC, as weird as that is to say, Michigan is making a change at quarterback.
Alex Orji, kind of surprisingly, I say this surprisingly, I'll explain why in a moment, named the starting quarterback against USC. I think that's surprising because I didn't anticipate. I was talking to some colleagues before the press conference today, and I said, do you think that we're going to hear anything? And they were like, no, why would Sharon Moore even say it? So that kind of tells you that they're going to put the full force behind Alex Orji. Because he says, hey, he's going to be the starting quarterback. He's going to go forward. It's going to be all him. So I think that is interesting because obviously that means that he's going to have the full week with the ones. Everything is going to be geared behind him. Everything that he says they had everything installed as far as offensively is what the types of stuff he would run. But that means that they can hone those things this week. They can figure out what kind of passes work best for him. And what kind of run plays. So this is welcome and encouraged news.
No good team over the last few seasons has pulled a defeat out of the jaws of victory quite as often as the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like the only way they lose is in games that they were sure to win in the fourth quarter. On Sunday, it was a 26.
We are just a day away from Nebraska and Illinois.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast.
We wanted to talk about some numbers. We wanted to talk about some trends and some statistics that maybe don't look the best for Nebraska football. But with that comes opportunity for Nebraska to reverse some things, to break some streaks, to end some trend lines here on Friday night as the Fighting Illini of Illinois come storming into Memorial Stadium for the first ever Friday night game, Friday night at Memorial Stadium under the lights. We've had Friday games, as I realized this week, but I believe it's the first time on Friday night. So, okay, two little facts here, indisputable facts. Matt Rule is 2-19 as a head coach against ranked competition. That goes from his 1 year at Nebraska to his 3 years at Baylor and his 4 years at Temple. That's against teams ranked in the AP top 25 at the time of kickoff. Nebraska has lost 24 consecutive games against ranked opponents, dating to a win against Oregon in 2016. Do either of these figures mean anything on Friday night when kickoff arrives at 7 p.m.?
Well, without looking at it too deeply, I would assume that 2-19 against ranked teams, almost all of it comes as a pretty gigantic underdog.
Right.
At the very least, a little one.
He's been a big underdog most of the time. Yeah.
That would be like, I was trying to look because I've tracked all this stuff through the various game logs, but very few times in Rule's career as he played a ranked team and been ranked. Actually, this may be the first time. One of the first times.
You keep talking about that, and I will check.
I mean, you'd have to go back to Baylor. You'd have to go back to Baylor probably in 18. They played in the conference title game They were underdogs there.
So Baylor in 2019 was ranked 8th when it played Oklahoma in the conference championship game. Oklahoma was 6th. That was a 30-23 loss. And then Baylor lost to 5th ranked Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, 26-14.
They were underdogs in both of those games.
Oh, for sure, against OU and Georgia. I mean, those are respectable games. Yeah, those are respectable games. The year before that, in 2018, Rule's second year at Baylor, Baylor was never in the rankings that year. So just the 2019 games, his last 2 games at Baylor, they were ranked. At Temple, he's playing teams like Notre Dame. So he was a heavy underdog in those games. And So what are you going to say, that the 2-19 doesn't matter?
Yeah, I am going to say that. I don't think it matters that much. I mean, it's I don't think it's very emblematic of their they don't get up for big games or whatever. They've been massively under talented in giant games, or games in which the other team was ranked. So they're ranked. They're playing against a ranked team, and Nebraska is a greater than a touchdown favorite. So all those those things don't really apply to this game. 24 against ranked opponents. I don't know that really, 24 in a row losses against ranked opponents, which is just insane. I don't know, for almost the same reasons, I don't know that really applies here either. I don't think Illinois is that good. I don't think Illinois is good enough to be ranked, to be honest with you.
Okay, I'm pulling that quote out.
Yeah, sorry, you put that on Twitter. I don't know. I think they've done a nice job so far this season. Obviously, Nebraska's done they're not much better from a resume perspective, but I just watch them and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. There's some warts there. So I'm gonna say no, that those numbers really don't mean anything going into this one.
Okay, so Temple in 2015, he played 2 ranked games. Notre Dame, Temple was ranked 21st. Notre Dame was ranked 9th. That was a 24-20 Notre Dame win. And then later that year in December, which would have been the AAC championship game, 20th ranked Temple played number 17 Houston and lost 24-13. So 0-4, underdogs in both those games. 0-4 as a ranked versus ranked head coach. His wins against ranked opponents also came in AAC games during that time at Temple. So yeah, I'm with you. That one doesn't matter. I think it's a different situation here at Nebraska in 2024. There's not a lot that's applicable from any of that to what we're going to see on the field Friday night. The 24 consecutive games that Nebraska has lost against ranked competitions, I think there's more relevance to that, because whether Illinois deserves to be ranked or not, and the Illini jumped in at number 24 in the AP poll last week, or this week, it was Sunday when that came out. That then creates kind of a feel around this game that players in the locker room for Nebraska have experienced. So there's nobody in this locker room other than a few coaches who have experienced any of those ranked versus ranked games, or when Matt Rule has coached against a ranked opponent. But there's players in this locker room who have played against ranked opponents for Nebraska and have been a part of that 0-24 streak, which I'm surprised, honestly, that's not getting more run. That's not getting more talk in this week here. Haven't heard a lot about the fact that it's been almost 8 years since Nebraska beat a ranked opponent. And maybe it's because Illinois is 24th and not 4th. And if Nebraska was playing Ohio State this week, it would be all about that. But they just snuck in last week. I think it matters. I think it means something. I think until you win one of those games, until you win a few of those games and you get rid of that stigma, there's some carryover, even though this team has done a nice job of moving past a lot of the things that have plagued Nebraska football for the last several years. They're still just 3 games in. And I think that's a hurdle that this program, not just this team, but this Nebraska football program must clear.
Yeah. I think, until you do it, you haven't done it. And so Nebraska does have an opportunity, I think, coming up tomorrow, where now, like I said, it's not Ohio, like you said, it's not Ohio State. It's not not like, Wisconsin, where they've owned you for the last decade. It's it's a different challenge. So with that being said, Illinois won the last 2 games that these 2 teams have played in Memorial Stadium, dating back to the disastrous 2020 COVID year game. That was, I mean, just horrendous. But that was now a long time ago. Another stat, I'll cherry pick this one out for you because I have some numbers on this. I was researching it this week. So Nebraska hasn't won a game against a ranked team as a ranked team in 13 years. That'd be since November 12th, 2011. There were some things going on that day when Nebraska played Penn State. And so they're 0 for their last 10. The last 10 times Nebraska has been a ranked team and they've played against a ranked team, they have not won those games. I'm looking at a list of them. The last time it happened was the 62-3 Ohio State game in 2016. And then obviously there was the week before that. There's a couple bowl games that were mixed in there. Nebraska is 2 out of their last 15 in these such games, 2 wins in their last 15 tries as a ranked team against a ranked team. And there are some brutal losses in here. These games, you know, like 62-3 for an example, like maybe Ohio State's obviously really good. They were fantastic that year, and they were coached by Urban Meyer and that. And we found out about Nebraska in 2016 how maybe fake it was as they started 7-0 that year. But they were 17.5 point underdogs in that game. They lost by 59. They exploded. Tommy Armstrong got hurt, and he went
to the hospital.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. So
Nebraska went to the hospital that game.
The Melvin Gordon game is in here. Where Nebraska was up 17-3, and then they just imploded. So there's some things in there where you're like, oh boy, man, they've gotten to that point and completely fallen flat in their faces a lot.